Hello, I'm Verity Platt. I'm a professor of classics and history of art here at Cornell, and I'm a curator of the cast collection. So when Cornell was founded, one of the most important things for the university was to have teaching collections. So that included books for the library, it included models for teaching engineering, it also included casts of famous sculptures which were used for teaching classical archaeology and training in the fine arts. When many museums were set up in the 19th century, they were seen not just as a way of encountering original works of art, but as a way of learning about art and archaeology in the broader sense, and especially as a source for the teaching of the fine arts. So for drawing and sculpture, students would go and copy objects in museums, and casts were not necessarily seen as lesser to the other objects that were in the museum because the whole collection was important for pedagogical purposes. There are some funny discussions of the cast collection when it was being created in the late 19th century, where new casts had come to Cornell. The Cornell Daily Sun reported that this was a wonderful thing, not just for Cornell, but for upstate New York. And somebody commented that Ithaca is Greek, the statues in Goldwin Smith Hall are Greek. So you can see it as part of an interesting kind of chapter in the reception of the classical tradition in upstate New York. But from the early 20th century, we see a shift in attitudes to plaster casts, partly with the development of photography and also with the development of mass tourism. So casts became seen as merely copies, and the original became celebrated and fetishized as more important than its copies. So gradually casts fell out of favor, they took up a lot of space, the classical tradition became less and less important. So by the time we get to the mid-20th century, casts are seen as symbols of an outdated approach to the arts, and also as representing a kind of cultural authority which was being radically questioned. At the same time at Cornell, more space was needed for teaching, and casts were just in the way. So what was the Museum of Classical Archaeology, which took up the entire ground floor of Goldwin Smith Hall, was gradually reduced in size, and the casts were either put in storage, they were moved to teaching rooms, and in some cases they were actually destroyed. Sometimes in kind of radical acts of iconoclasm, because they were seen as embodying a tradition that the students and faculty of that time wanted to overthrow. We once had a complete replica of the Parthenon frieze, which was ripped out in a very aggressive way, so it's very damaged now, but we have sections of it all around Goldwin Smith Hall. And I often think about how that relates to the original frieze that's now in the British Museum in London, and then the cast of that frieze which is in the Acropolis Museum in Athens. And many people would like to see an exchange whereby we see casts in the British Museum and the original back in Athens. And so our replicas are part of a bigger kind of family of objects that relate directly to those big questions about repatriation, although the casts themselves are not, they're not problematic, and that's one reason to celebrate them and the opportunities that they actually open up to us. One of the interesting juxtapositions that we're starting to see in museums is the putting of originals and copies together. And actually there are some contemporary artists who are very playful in the way that they integrate original antiquities and casts and play with the classical tradition in installations that are actually within museums where they are engaging with these longer famous collections of ancient originals. So there are many different ways in which to approach these themes, and casts have a really vibrant role to play there. They also are very useful when it comes to thinking about the colours of ancient statuary. Nobody wants to start painting marble originals, but you can paint casts knowing that you can always make another cast. And they have a very important role to play in making us rethink the whole nature of colour and race and all associated issues in the ancient world. cast fell out of favour because of this fetishization of the original. But the idea of access to the original is itself becoming more problematic and complicated in the contemporary world as we deal with these issues of repatriation. So casts offer a very handy way of being able to experience an object in the round and understand how it operates in space without having to have the original one there, so that objects can be repatriated. So if we can celebrate the cast again, this gets around some of those problems. I love seeing the students just living next to them and just being part of their lives. Of course, I hope that they encourage people to want to study ancient art, and that they think about the classical tradition as something that is accessible to them, and that they are invited to learn about and kind of make their own in a way. But also just that they are part of the fabric of our lives here at Cornell feels like a special gift.